Welcome back. We're continuing on with our discussion of David Hume's problem of evil. We're going to look at how David Hume attempts to solve the problem. Remember, the problem is this: if God is all good and all powerful, why is there evil? And now we have misery and wickedness, natural evil and moral evil. Why would God allow all this evil in the world? So we're going to look at the solutions that Hume gives us in the characters of Demea, Philo, and Cleanthes, and you'll notice that the way they answer is connected to their view of who God is. So remember, Demea is the orthodox theist. He thinks God is infinite and we are finite. We're like God, but unlike God. Cleanthes thinks that God is totally like us, just more powerful. And Philo thinks God is completely other. We can't really know God's nature. He's so other. So they're going to answer the problem of evil according to their views. And you'll see that these responses that they give us are popular. This is what you've probably heard popularly out there. So I want you to consider a tragic scenario. Maybe someone has a child with incurable brain cancer, and imagine that person hearing these responses when they ask, why God, why my kid? See if they're intellectually satisfying. Okay, so the first solution is Philo's. Okay, the world's full of misery and wickedness. Why does God allow this? Here's what he says: God's goodness is perfect but incomprehensible. This is so like Philo to say that because he thinks God's nature is incomprehensible. So he would say something like that, right? But there's a problem with saying that. Now think about this too. You have the kid with incurable cancer. Is that going to satisfy him? We really can't know. No, that's not going to be satisfying. So the response is going to be, this is an appeal to an unknown. Remember, appeal to ignorance, it's an informal fallacy. So it's assuming the thing we should be proving, and it's an unknown. God is unknown. The second part of the response is this: if God's goodness is unknowable, then all religion, prayer, and praise ends. This is what Cleanthes says in the dialogue. Why does all religion end? Because we wouldn't know what God's will is, so we wouldn't know what to ask God for. We wouldn't know what to thank God for. We wouldn't know what to praise God for. Remember, we talked about praise earlier as an spontaneous act of worship. Well, what would we know God is doing if God is unknowable? So religion in terms of practice would end. So I want you to study these solutions in this order: solution 1, response 1. Okay, and you don't need to know who said it, but you should know what the solution and response is. Solution 1, response 1. Second solution, solution 2, is from Demea. Demea says this, and you've heard this before. We know in part now, we will know in the future when we see the whole picture. And he literally means the whole picture. You're going to know all the intricacies of God's plan in the future. Now think about this. Can you know everything, all of it in the future? He does mean this in the dialogue, though. We know in part now, we'll know in the future. Remember, you have a kid with cancer and they're saying this to you. Is that going to be satisfying? You don't know why now, but in the future you'll know the whole story. No, it's not satisfying. We want to know now. My child is suffering now, and there are problems here. And this is Cleanthes again. Appeal to the future begs the question. Remember, begging the question is a circular argument. It's assuming the thing you should be proving. So we're assuming God is good when we should be proving God is good. So that's not going to work. And the second part, and this is something we're adding, is on this view, to know anything requires us to know everything, the whole picture, which is impossible for finite beings. Only God could know the whole story. Humans will never know the whole story. We'll always be growing in our knowledge. So this is not a satisfactory response. Sorry, Demea. Third solution comes from Cleanthes. And he says there's more good than evil in the world. Now think about that. How would we know that there's more good than evil in the world? And we just went through this whole list. The world is full of misery and wickedness. So how would we even approach this? So here's what Philo says to Cleanthes. Knowledge of the amounts of suffering in comparison is impossible. And I should tell you, there's a subtle change here in the dialogue. They were talking about misery and wickedness, and now they're talking about pleasure and pain, as if pleasure is good and pain is bad. So we need to question that as well. Is that how we talk about good and evil, pleasure and pain? So knowledge of the amounts of suffering, pain, in comparison is impossible. So Philo has us consider all the pain in our own life. Can you measure all the pleasure and all the pain in your own life? And it seems as though people pass out from pain, but they don't often pass out from pleasure. And you can be enjoying some pleasure and just a little bit of pain comes in, suffering, and it takes away the pleasure. The animals. Can you measure all of the animal suffering in the world that's going on right now? We don't even know. Maybe there's some Bambi in the wilderness that's suffering. We don't know about it. So it's impossible to measure all the pain and suffering in the world and see if there's more pleasure than pain. And that is still a problem, because if God is all good and all powerful, why should there be any suffering at all? That's the very thing we're asking. Why even a little bit of suffering? Why can't it all just be pleasure and happiness all the time? So Cleanthes' solution also is not very satisfying, especially if you have the child with cancer. There's more good than evil in the world. Where? All right, the fourth solution is also Cleanthes. And remember his view of God. So it's so like him to say this. The fourth solution is God's power is great but finite. Basically, God's doing the best he can do given the power he has, right? Okay, so this is where they consider perhaps the God who created this world is a baby God, a newbie. And he's making mistakes because he's just new at creating worlds. Or maybe he's senile. Maybe a senile God made the world, and that's why there's so many flaws in it. Okay, but the problem is, and Philo makes us think about this. Even with more power, you would expect a better world. So Philo says, look, if I am a finite being and I can imagine a better world and I had a little more power, I could bring it about. So even if we were finite, even if God were finite, I should say, and he had more power than we do, we would expect more of this world. And the real problem, though, I'm putting it in brackets because we're adding it to Hume, is furthermore, God cannot be creator and be finite. So the flaw is really in the conception of God that Cleanthes has. Finite beings can't create ex nihilo from no previously existing material. Finite beings can only manipulate what's already there. So this is a bigger objection. God can't be creator and be finite. All right, so that's the fourth solution, and the response, not very satisfying, especially if you have that child. God did his best. Fifth solution, and this is Philo. Now, he doesn't think natural evil is necessary. I need to give you an argument about natural evil isn't original and it isn't necessary. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to give you a short argument. And I know this is a little bit messy looking, but it's a Word document. I wanted to type an argument up that corresponds with something Philo's saying, and it's going to lead us into the next solution. It goes like this. Let's call this, what is the argument that natural evil is not original with creation? Okay. Now we have to think about the nature of God and evil, natural evil. Maybe we can say this. I'm just going to type up some notes so you have it. Natural evil is toil, hard work without a lot of fruit, strife, people problems, arguing with spouses, children, parents, bosses, old age, sickness, and ultimately physical death. Right? That's natural evil. So that's not original with creation and theism. Here's an argument. Remember, we're doing philosophy of religion as we go. If God is infinitely powerful, he has the power, create a world without natural evil. Toil, strife, old age, sickness, and death. Okay, so if he's infinitely powerful, he could create a world without natural evil. If God is infinitely good, he would create a world without natural evil. Okay? If God could have from 1 and would have from 2, then God must have created, if he exists at all, a world without natural evil. Okay? If God must have, then God did create a world without natural evil. Okay? So I want to highlight some key terms here to help you remember. If he could, let's highlight that, if it'll let me. Underline. If he could, then he would. He could have and he would have. Then he must have. And if he must have, then he did create. Oops, I want to underline that. He did create a world without natural evil. So what can we conclude from this? Let's make a conclusion. Therefore, natural evil is not original with creation. All right, so now some implications. So this is the argument. I'm going to give you some implications next. Implications are that, I want to tab these again. How did I do that? If natural evil is not original, then it is not imposed. Then it is imposed by God. So God created the world without natural evil. So if it's here, then God must have imposed it. And if it is imposed by God, then it must be for a good reason. What's a good reason to impose natural evil? Natural evil is imposed by God because of moral evil. All right, so now we have to see, wow, what's the connection between natural evil and moral evil? Another implication here is if God imposed natural evil after he created, then he acted after creation and is continuing to act through moral evil. So what does this do for deism? So this is an argument against deism. God is ruling in the created order through natural evil. So what we're going to have to do now is see, is there a theory that accounts for the connection between natural evil and moral evil. I'm going back to Hume now to show you he sees a connection, but does he give us a good explanation? So let's call this the argument that natural evil is not original. I'd like you to know the argument part and make a note card, put it into your long-term memory. Let's return to Hume because Philo sees that no natural evil is necessary. It's not even needed. We don't need natural evil. We don't need animal pain. And you can imagine an animal living a very long life. And you're thinking, oh, what if there's overpopulation? Well, perhaps animals could fall asleep and die in their sleep. For example, a cat. Can you imagine having a cat and the cat has no pain for an hour? Yes, you can imagine that. Can you imagine this cat has no pain for the whole day? Can you imagine the cat has no pain for a week, for a year, for 5 years, for its whole lifetime, and then it dies in its sleep without pain? Yes, we can imagine that. It's logically possible. So why couldn't God do that? God could use secret divine intervention to protect us from a lot of calamity. Angels could protect you from stepping out in front of a big truck, right? God could have created humans with greater natural diligence. He could have created us with more concern to pick up trash on campus or use your blinker when you're turning. But he didn't. God doesn't have to create the world with all kinds of excesses in nature. You can imagine a world where there are islands in the ocean that have a lot of variety in weather without extremes. Perhaps in the center of the ocean, there's a mountain. At the top of the mountain, there's a forest with snow and you can ski. And as you go down the mountain, there's maybe pastures and you can hike. And as you go down further, maybe there's deserts and you can enjoy the desert. And then there's beachfront property and you can have crashing waves or gentle waves, and everyone can have beachfront property. You can have variety without extremes. You can imagine that, right? Why couldn't God create that? So at the end of this conversation, Philo says we don't need suffering. We don't need it to learn. He considers that too. We don't need it to appreciate. He goes through the appreciation argument. You can have variety without suffering. For example, let's say you have a favorite dessert, cherry cheesecake. Tonight you get cherry cheesecake, but you don't get cherry cheesecake for another year. But there are other desserts you can enjoy, perhaps chocolate chip cookies or maybe pizookie. So you can enjoy other desserts, but you don't get cherry cheesecake for another year. Now, you're not suffering and not having it, but when you do come back to it, you're going to enjoy it even more. So you don't have to suffer to enjoy. So he doesn't think we need to suffer to appreciate. All right, so he comes to this conclusion: natural evil isn't necessary and it's not original. So why is it here? So he concludes, and I think mistakenly, that God is indifferent to good and evil. So remember, we talked about this earlier. God can't be evil. He can't be evil and good, but perhaps God can be indifferent. We didn't consider that possibility, but here we get to consider it. Is God indifferent to good and evil? Maybe he just doesn't care. That's a perspective that maybe deists would have. But here's the response, and this is not Hume's response. We're adding this response. God created the moral sense of humans. So you have a moral sense, I have a moral sense, I've seen it. You get outraged about things. You have a sense of justice. If I gave you F's on your exam when you didn't deserve it, you would be upset. So you have a moral sense, and God created the moral sense of humans with infinite, deliberate wisdom. And whenever we do anything with deliberate wisdom, we care about it. And God has infinite deliberate wisdom. So God cares infinitely. If humans have a moral sense and humans are in the image of God, God all the more has a moral sense. So there's this saying, he who made the ear, does he not hear? He who made the eye, does he not see? We can add, he who made the moral sense, is he not moral? So this is the conclusion to the response to Philo. God cannot be creator and be morally indifferent. So God can't create with infinite deliberate wisdom and not care. All right, so in creating, one cares. So David Hume's 5 solutions and 5 responses to the problem of evil are listed in 5 through 9, and at the end we don't have a solution to the problem of evil. Now remember, David Hume did say, for all we know, there may be a possibility of an easy solution, but we haven't found it in Hume. So at the end of this section, Hume's attempt to solve the problem of evil, what I want you to take away are these points about religion, that religion does not arise from a sense of misery. The discussion we had about the depths of moral and natural evil, I would like you to know the argument that natural evil is not original. And then I want you to know the 5 solutions, 5 solutions, second, third, fourth, fifth, and 5 responses to the problem of evil. So I'll say, what are Hume's 5 solutions and 5 responses to the problem of evil? That's what I'd like you to take away from this long discussion that we've just had. Where we're going from here is another kind of solution, the free will solution to the problem of evil. And then we're going to look at the ironic solution to the problem of evil. After we go through this will end our unit on theism. So stay tuned for the free will solution.